Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's Go for Leadership podcast. My guest today is Tobias Burkhardt.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Tobias, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great for having me. It's a great pleasure to be on your show.
Awesome. Thank you, Tobias. And for our listeners, maybe you can give us a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, my name is Tobias. I'm a co-founder and CEO of an organization called Shift School. We are an organization dealing with leadership transformation. That's what we do. So we offer programs and lifelong learning communities for leaders. And we started with digital transformation, but we're now defining transformation in a more holistic sense. So it is sustainable transformation, digital transformation, societal transformation, everything that is of value for leaders.
Awesome. And leaders, of course, and leadership is our purpose. So maybe you give us a quick, let's say, definition or meaning. What does leadership mean to you? How would you define leadership, Tobias?
I'd like to start that question with defining what it is not so much anymore, because usually leadership is defined by how much authority a leader can give to people or grant to people, and how much autonomy the other side gets. And I think that's a little bit outdated. So I think we should talk more about the behavior and the attitudes that a leader possesses and develops over time, and that has a lot to do with the notion of growth mindset. So it's not so much about being a leader, but it's growing as a leader and experimenting into leadership. And I think that is really important, especially in more agile settings. We need more leadership, not less. That's a big confusion that a lot of people see, where we have to get rid of hierarchies and leaders. I think the exact opposite. We need strong leadership, but we have to define that in different ways. Maybe that's a topic that we can discuss today.
Awesome. I mean, in particular, you have mentioned in your introduction that you're dealing with leadership transformation. I think we are also in a time of transformation. Can you a little bit outline what and how you support leaders that are in transformation mode?
Yeah, I'm currently joking a lot because before the pandemic, we used to have a lot of effort to create conditions to explain something that was called VUCA. So we tried to make that as an experience for people to really feel how VUCA feels like and how to act in that uncertain, ambiguous conditions. We don't have to do that anymore because we all know how that is, but that is the stuff we're dealing with. So if you take VUCA as a foundation, we're dealing with a time where we cannot plan anymore. We cannot incrementally develop things over time. We don't know what tomorrow brings. In those times, we need to develop a new mindset, a new attitude towards the world outside, and also the conditions in our companies, and that's what we're dealing with.
I'm absolutely agreeing. Do you think that, I mean, of course, you are in agreement, but why do you think that leaders that are, let's say, following more traditional rules, giving authority or, let's say, providing autonomy to its staff will fail in this, let's say, level of VUCA or transformation that we are currently in?
Yeah, we have identified 5 dimensions where things usually go wrong. And if you look at transformation cases, there are many studies about that. Just the latest one from McKinsey, for example, said that 80% of all transformations fail in one form or the other. And from my experience, it's never technology. It's never the case. It's never the thing that you want to change. It's more the people around it and the behavior. And just give you a concrete example, I think changing opinions and changing a set is crucial. And that is really hard when you have a a normal hierarchy-oriented culture where admitting things wrong personally and moving to a different thing is really hard, and that has to be trained. So you cannot just push a button and say, well, I'm going to behave differently in towards my team, in my company, in my leadership, with my leadership colleagues. And so that takes a long time. Behavior change is really hard. So we are hardwired in our brains for many decades. And if you want to change something, you can only do that by experience. And that has to be done over a long period of time. So patience is another thing that we teach our people. So we cannot just decide and demand and throw things into the organization, then expect everything to change right away. That's not going to happen anymore.
So do you think, I mean, I've seen in many big and large corporations that there are initiatives like Scrum trainings or Kanban trainings or design thinking trainings and development courses for leaders. Do you think that this may help leaders also to succeed, or do you think that that's maybe a trigger or maybe an impulse, but at the end it's also by let's say the people itself? Maybe you can outline that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, there are a lot of great methods out there, and you've named a few, and I'm not blaming the methods or criticizing those wonderful tools, but I think they, in many cases, they are just taken as an alibi, or you just teach a new method and send everybody to a 2-day lean business or Scrum course and stuff like that, and then you expect things to change, and that's not going to happen. We have to unlearn our way of thinking, the way we deal with things. Otherwise, those new methods won't last, or they won't stick. If you take, you mentioned Scrum as an example. If you implement Scrum and you still have an old leadership mindset, and the leader comes in and said, "I don't care what rules you have defined. I'm telling you what to do right now." So the whole building of Scrum will crush in a matter of seconds. So, and I've seen that many times. So I think we have to start the other way around. Of course, we are used to learning new methods and tools and stuff like that. That's fine. But I think we have to, we cannot expect culture to change only by teaching methods. So we have to define what culture do we want, and we have to honestly discuss that and discuss things that, do we really want something to change here? Are we really willing to cannibalize our existing products? Are we really honestly willing to give away power to people and customers and stuff like that? And this discussion and this definition is, in our method, the first step. Otherwise, you will always end up with investing a lot of money, a lot of training, a lot of discussion, and in the end, nothing changes. That's what I've come to believe. So I call that, or maybe just one more notion, I call the whole industry I'm in, or we are in, the transformation circus. And obviously, we have been a part of it in the past. And we're trying to build up a nice ring, a lot of spotlights, and we do a lot of fancy stuff, nice collaboration rooms, co-working spaces, and tools and stuff like that. But we only tend to look at the fun stuff. We never look backstage. We have to go backstage and also look and discuss the dirty stuff and the hard decision that come along with that. And that is not done in many cases, and that's why a lot of transformations fail in the end.
So I completely agree that there's a lot of alibi initiatives in the room, let's say, or in the world out there. So how do you make sure that leaders really change their mindset? You mentioned growth mindset. I'm a strong believer of the growth mindset by Carol Dweck. So how do you imply with your company, let's say that people, leaders, senior executives that can initiate the change, let's say from their decision power, that they really let's say support their company or their teams to start working on their mindset, not saying they change the mindset, but working on their mindset and start, let's say, the journey, ignite the journey.
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's why we put that first. So that's basically the game between commitment and or responsibility and taking ownership and accountability on the other side. So I truly believe if a leader doesn't have skin in the game, nothing will change. So we try to implement that or make sure that everybody on that project or whatever it is, or in the leadership training, has skin in the game. So is really committed to the things and has the responsibility to push that through. That is one example. And another thing, there are many things we could do, but another good question to ask in the beginning is, what are we going to do if this is successful? Because usually managers and leaders are, and especially in the agile transformational realm, are much more concerned about looking at risks and budgets and asking the question, what happens when we fail? And I mean, we've seen many projects fail, and a lot of money has been wasted in the past. So I'd rather turn that around and ask the question, what happens if we are successful with that innovation project, with that cooperation with the startup, with implementing Scrum? What consequences can we expect, and look at that and discuss that. So that is the honesty I was talking about, and that way you're not 100% sure that things will go the right way, but you can always hold people accountable, and especially me as a consultant or a facilitator of such processes. I always can go back and say, well, you in the beginning said that this is okay. I have that here on paper, on tape, on whatever. Let's discuss that. If your opinion changed, well, we have to go back and align that again. Otherwise, we're just drifting apart. So that's at the beginning of that process.
Are you also experiencing there's a lot of risk awareness in the market out there? I mean, we mentioned that the pandemic has, of course, provoked exogenous forces to change. What I also wanted to bring into the table when you mentioned the opportunities, right? So what are our opportunity costs not to transform? I mean, we are still making profits and maybe companies are still growing, but there will be the time where competition is, of course, increasing. There will be exogenous forces forcing us to change. If you look in the composition of the DAX, for example, that's completely shifted, or the big, large corporations have been completely, let's say, are not the same from a composition perspective than it has been in the past. So maybe this is also a trigger that I have brought in such discussions: the opportunity cost not to change or not to transform, also the risks not to transform, and the risk that somebody needs to, of course, overcome by starting the transformation. Now, one aspect that I'm very curious about is you are also, of course, a sincere expert about leadership, digital transformation. Sorry, and this digital transformation is something that has been heavily discussed now, also on European level, but also on a global level. How companies evolve on their digital, let's say, maturity. Maybe you can also give us a little bit outline or your view about how digital transformation can support leadership transformation, or maybe this is something completely independent.
No, it's not. I mean, it depends on how you define that, and that's I think that's the one of the key problem. If you ask 5 leaders in a company what they regard as digital transformation, you get 6 different answers. And I think that is the first thing that an organization has to do, or that's basically how I kickstart every leadership workshop that we do. We ask that question: how do you define that? So you need a common definition. Just Google a digital transformation or go to Wikipedia and look at the answer. You most likely wouldn't agree on that, what's written there. And there is no master plan on that. So every organization, every business model, every industry has to define that, what that means. So if you're asking an HR person, they might consider a digital transformation more connected to new work and stuff. If you go to IT, it's more the processes, and maybe the sales department looks for new business models and services and stuff like that. So it's especially here in Germany, we tend to just have one word, one phrase, and to define everything. But I think in that world we're living in, and digitalization, whatever you put in there as a buzzword, is not sufficient to define all that. So we have to be more precise in our language. That's the first thing. And then, of course, if you now aiming at the more technological part, I think we've seen quite some progress in the last 5 to 6 years. At least in awareness, a lot of things have happened. And of course, the pandemic has changed things in digital workplace and stuff like that. But if you look at processes and how things are handled, how we treat our customers or how we not treat them, how we define services, there is still a large potential. And that's not because we don't have the technological capabilities. It's one reason, of course, it's really, really complex. So we have to find ways to find certain subsystems that we can change things, because if you want to change everything at once, you always come to the decision that's too complex. Let's go back to the legacy system. And the other is, of course, the cultural part. So it's again that mindset part. So I think the growth mindset and all that stuff has a lot to do with digital transformation, and it's rather not the technology that is so fast evolving. It's more us humans or us leaders that are evolving so slowly, and that's the challenge. And it doesn't matter if it's digital transformation or diversity, and we will see the same thing happening with sustainability. By the way, I think we have that tendency that we only do what we really, really need to do, and we are not. You mentioned the risk of the risk example, and I think we have to confront that. And the opportunity cost, of course, are high, and that's why we need to find different definitions on what that means for us. Otherwise, the future will be always abstract, and you cannot decide on abstract futures, or you will not decide on that, and rather default with the status quo, and that's the problem.
I like your outline, and I think that's something also as a leader, of course, you want success, right? You don't want to fail. And of course, by changing something, there's the saying out there, never touch a running system. You, of course, bring you in the position that, of course, failing is an option. You don't want that. But I think one aspect that you also mentioned in your introduction, which I want to switch gears now, is the learning communities. Do you think that by building up communities, bringing people that are in the same position and can exchange maybe their current fear or their situation, and maybe also their failures and maybe also their successes, helps to overcome that, let's say, level of static where nobody really wants to make the first move and maybe do the first step?
I would answer that question with yes and no. But maybe let's start with the no first, because I think many cultures, especially in large corporations, prohibit or disable that. Although it's really necessary to do that, but it's really hard. especially in male-dominated leadership teams, to open up and change things. Just recur one example that really happened to me. That was a discussion about vulnerability and exposing ourselves and taking risks in innovation and stuff like that. So it got more into a discussion that got more into the touchy-feely thing. And there was one guy sitting next to me on the table opening up and said, mentioned a book that he was reading about that. So he made the first tiny step to open up. And then one of his colleagues from across the table was laughing, said, "Wow, do you have time to read books in that situation?" And everybody shut down again. So those tiny things, I have many examples. It's really hard in an existing culture. So, but it's much more, or it's better if you take single persons outside the company and mix them with people from other companies. They're much more willing to open up and do that more quickly. Inside companies, it's really hard to do that. Of course, there are some mechanisms. You can change sites, for example. It's a big difference if you take a leadership team inside, like the boardroom, or take them to the countryside, into nature, and have them reflect. That's why we do all our trainings outside in the nature, not in training rooms anymore, because that's a different ball game. So there are many little things that you can do, but the biggest lever is mixing people with other people from other companies where they feel psychologically safe.
Awesome. I like that approach and like that idea. So maybe you can give us also a little bit learning from your personal view. So you have become, of course, a leader and now a consultant for leaders. Tobias, what has been your journey, and where, or what you'd have said the younger Tobias when he started his career?
Oh, I would tell him many things. And I mean, the younger, I probably tell us, go into entrepreneurship right away and become an entrepreneur. It took me 10 years to discover that I did not fit in large organizations, and so sometimes I do have that feeling that I wasted some time there, which is in fact not true, because all my experience now is of value for my customers, because I know exactly what they're talking about when they talk about the problems. But I think talking about the learnings and stuff like that is, and that's a recent learning. I was more the go-getting doer guy, and fast is better, and the hard way is the only right way. I've come to change that a little bit. So that's why we now changing our formats to a lighter, more continuous, more adaptable format. And I think I would tell my younger self that it is really crucial to take time to reflect and watch out for health, body, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we all say that, we all know that, but it's really hard to do that. But I've come to appreciate that. So that's why we moved to the country. I mentioned that before in our formats, for example, that we've taken it slower. We don't have that much content in the stuff. We have much more room for reflection. And that's stuff I really had to learn the hard way and transform my opinion on that before, especially when conducting leadership programs and stuff like that.
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gerd.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tobias, for being our guest today. It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great fun, and thank you for all the awesome questions that you asked.
Awesome. Thank you.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.